Hedgehog. Sorry for the delay with this video. I've had a really nasty case of the flu, just in time to make me super paranoid about the coronavirus. I don't think it's that, but whatever I've got, it's really knocked me on my ass, and I'm still recovering. Don't worry though, I'll edit out the bits where I can't stop coughing until my lungs are halfway out my mouth. Anyway, if you haven't watched my last video on episode 1 of Sonic 4, well, please go watch it. I desperately need the views to fuel my fragile ego. Then like, subscribe, and come back. But if you can't be bothered doing those things, and who could blame you, here's a super fast recap. Episode 1 had some fundamentally sound design, all of which was negated by the sluggish controls and the perversely absent sense of momentum. I'd heard it said that Episode 2 fixed the dodgy controls to some degree, and I'm relieved to be able to report that there's some truth to this. The controls are still significantly worse than the 16-bit Sonic games, but significantly better than Episode 1. They're definitely improved enough that they're no longer a complete barrier to enjoying the game. The feel of momentum is better, you don't feel like simply touching the ground will halt you in your tracks, and Sonic is a bit more nimble in the air. And almost everything else is improved as well. Sonic looks less gangly and more like his old sleek self. When he starts moving, he strides forth like he's actually keen to get down to business this time around. The music is a little better. I can actually almost remember some of it this time. Not much, but some. You get warnings when there are instant kill bottomless pits. I'd prefer there were no bottomless pits, I just find them frustrating in a game like this. But at least now you know when you're going to fall to a lower path and when you're going to fall into a lethal oblivion. And I prefer this episode's special stages. They're an adaptation of the ones from Sonic 2, which might be my favourite of all Sonic special stages. The handling in these seems a little worse though. It's tougher to be precise with your movement and the timing of jumps seems to be a little off. I always feel as though I'm hitting mines when I shouldn't be. Possibly that's just down to my ineptitude though. The biggest difference though is the inclusion of Tails. Now, I like Tails well enough, but what I don't like is the combo moves he makes possible in this game. If you activate a combo while you're in the air, Tails will grab Sonic and you can fly a short distance before he runs out of stamina and falls back to Earth. If you do it on the ground, Tails and Sonic combine to form a giant rolling ball that moves significantly faster than Sonic's fastest rolling speed when he's alone. I don't have any problem with these combo moves as such, it's just their implementation that I find less than great. It'd be okay if they were used mainly to access hidden areas and aid exploration, but instead they're flat out required to progress at times, and those occasions are literally signposted for you, taking away any of the fun of discovery. Also, activating these combos essentially pauses the action for a second or two, which doesn't sound like much, but it really does interrupt the flow of the game. Okay, let's take a run through the zones of this second episode. First up is Sylvania Castle Zone, which owes a lot to Sonic 2's Aquatic Ruin Zone, and Sonic 3's Marble Garden Zone. And I have to give the first act a thumbs up for one specific and kind of idiosyncratic reason. You see, I have an odd obsession with always running left at the start of levels in games like this, where you're spending 99% of your time running to the right. I can never shake the suspicion, or the hope, that maybe there will be some surprise just sitting innocently to the left. Usually that hope goes unfulfilled. But not this time. Behold, my obsession has yielded an extra life. That almost makes it all worthwhile. Apart from that though, well, it's nice to finally be playing a Sonic game that isn't genuinely painful to control. This level is a little bland, I find. Underwater areas feature prominently, and I still don't really think they have a place in Sonic games, at least not while they serve no real purpose other than halving your movement speed and stressing you out when you can't find an air bubble. I do like the way night falls in the third act and Dr. Robotnik's Death Egg, looms in the sky. Actually, this element of passing time is something that's incorporated into quite a few zones in both Episode 1 and 2 of Sonic 4, and it's a nice, if fairly insubstantial touch. The boss is, well, it looks the part at least. Fighting it isn't exactly a dynamic experience though. All you need to do is use Tails' flight ability to drop down on it, which also makes you mostly immune to harm. Not much of a challenge, which, I'm not going to complain about. Next up is the obligatory ice level, and it's a decent one. In fact, it may be my favourite zone out of the entire Sonic 4 roster. The music is one of the very few tunes that actually stuck in my brain once I'd finished playing, although I honestly can't tell if that's because I like it or because it's really kind of annoying. In truth, there isn't necessarily any real difference. My musical tastes often encompass what others tend to find irritating. It's a very attractive zone, or at least it is in my opinion, as an Australian who's never seen real snow and who possibly has a somewhat romantic view of icy alpine villages. There's a seriously epic roller coaster in the background, which actually comes to the fore in the second act. Combining Sonic with a roller coaster should be a no-brainer for some fast, smooth platforming action, and so it proves here. There's actually a good amount of fun to be had in this act, as long as your standards for what constitute fun aren't that high. And then, the third act is called Labyrinth at Absolute Zero. Apparently in Sonic terminology, the word labyrinth means you will drown, because like its namesake from the original game, this act is mostly underwater. So the action slows down, again, which is bad enough in itself, but then you've got these walruses, or warai, that create giant impassable ice blocks. I drowned many times over thanks to these guys, before I figured out that you need to do a homing attack at the earliest possible moment, or else you're trapped forever. Well, okay, not forever, but for a few seconds that feel like forever, as that impossibly stressful music plays and Sonic's lungs fill with agonizing icy water once again. The boss battle here is with Metal Sonic, and it's not too tough, but it is quite frustrating. You can switch between the foreground and the background, and so can your opponent, but you never seem to be on the right plane at the right time to actually inflict damage. And when you do manage to get to the next phase, Metal Sonic starts taking chunks out of the tracks, sending you plummeting to an instant death if you're not prepared, which you definitely won't be, the first time around at least, and probably not the second, third, fourth or fifth time round either, if your reflexes are as pathetic as mine. Fortunately, I have extra lives coming out of my ears. Next up, Oil Desert Zone, another remix of a zone from Sonic 2. I have to say, a little bit of originality would be nice. It's one thing to draw inspiration from the classics, it's another thing to rest on your laurels. Or, more accurately, to drag all your laurels out of the closet, giving them a quick shake and a bit of a makeover, and parade them out in front of a paying audience. This is supposed to be Sonic 4 after all, a completely new entry in the Sonic canon, and while a lot of work has gone into the updated levels, there's barely an original environment to be found. And this zone in particular seems a bit questionable to me. An oil field isn't exactly my idea of a fun place to spend much time in. At least there's no underwater sections to slow you down. There is quicksand though, which serves the same purpose. Fortunately there's not much of it. There are a lot of bottomless pits though, and I managed to fall into most of them at least once. Ultimately though, this is a pretty bland and boring zone, capped off by an irritatingly lengthy boss fight. For most of it, you're just waiting for crates to fall so you can reach high enough to attack Robotnik. Then, after what seems like many minutes, you get out into the fresh air, where you once again just have to wait until the boss decides it's time to open itself up to attack. Not very dynamic, not very fun. Nearing the end now, with another rehash of a Sonic 2 stage. Flying through the air on the wings of Tails' plane seemed cool and exciting back in the day, now it's just a more restrictive and less interesting bit of busy work. And then it's time for a quick jaunt across the exterior of Robotnik's Sky Fortress, and you know what, I think it may be time for me to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. The thing is, as you may be able to tell, I'm really not getting much enjoyment from this. Even with the much improved handling of Episode 2, and even though I objectively know that all the elements that make a decent Sonic game are here, I'm finding this all rather tedious. But the really uncomfortable thing is that I can't quite put my finger on why I'm finding it boring. As a wannabe YouTube gaming commentator, this is less than ideal. If I can't articulate my reasons for finding a game enjoyable or otherwise, I'm in trouble. So I better give it a go. To get a bit more of a perspective, I branched out a little and played some Sonic Mania, a game which pretty much everyone agrees is Sonic at his 2D best. And I played some Sonic Generations, a game which pretty much everyone agrees is basically okay. And of course, I went back and played some old school Mega Drive Sonic. Surely I was able to get a whole heap of enjoyment out of these games? Well, no, not really, not in any objective sense. I got a lot of nostalgia value from the Mega Drive Sonics, as always, but that's at least 75% due to the soundtracks, which are near the pinnacle of 16-bit music. And after slogging my way through Sonic 4, it's an undeniable pleasure to play a Sonic game that handles as well as Sonic Mania. But even with that game, I'm just tolerating it rather than enjoying it. I think it comes down to player agency. Even at their best, there's always a feeling in Sonic that the game is controlling you rather than the other way round. The games are always propelling you forward, be it with springs or slopes or any one of countless other contraptions. I've talked about liking platform games that have the audacity to let you move right to left as well as left to right. Sonic games are basically the antithesis of that. These are games where you could pretty safely tape down the control pad and just hit the jump button from time to time. This problem is accentuated with the addition of homing attacks, which take away even the small skill test of landing on an enemy. I feel oddly guilty for criticising Sonic games for these elements. These are conscious design choices. They're what make the game smooth, fast and appealing. They're the reasons a lot of people love them, including me decades ago. Now though, I have to say not so much, even if I'm risking my as yet non-existent YouTube career in saying so. Not long ago, I looked at James Pond 2. In many ways it's about as basic as a platformer gets, and it sure as hell lacks the style and flair of Sonic. But I realise now that it's the game I'd rather actually play these days. And the reason is, simple as James Pond 2 is, when you play it, you actually play it. You control James Pond, you manoeuvre him through the world, unsophisticated as it is. You jump on enemies to kill them, you pick up items, you find the level exits. Not the most dynamic gameplay, but you do it. You don't just hold down right on the control pad and wait for the game to propel you to the end of the level. Ultimately, Sonic the Hedgehog 4 is something of an anomaly in the gaming world. As a full-numbered sequel in one of the most famous game series of all time, it should by rights be either well loved for its greatness or notorious for its crappiness. Instead, it's largely forgotten, except by a small cadre of fans, and even the most hardcore of them would probably admit that the first episode at least has some pretty dodgy handling. Even the developers were apparently all too ready to let it slip into oblivion, as a planned third episode was abandoned without fanfare. And as for me, well, it may be time for me to make the sad admission that I'm now a Sonic fan in nostalgic terms only. I'll always have a place in my heart for the 16-bit versions, but as an actual game, I'm afraid the Sonic formula is basically obsolete in my eyes. Sonic 4 was a valiant attempt at following that formula and blending it with a few modern ingredients to create what they no doubt hoped would be a modern classic. But even once they got the control issues sorted out, the result was bland at best. Well, that's a somewhat depressing note to end on, for me at least. Apparently everyone who's not me absolutely loves Sonic Mania and is experiencing a Sonic Renaissance, a Sonic-sance. And, you know, I'm genuinely happy for them. But I'll be looking further afield for my classic platforming fix. Not in my next video though. No, next up I'm going to be making good on the hints I've been dropping and take a look at my personal favourite of all the many and varied user-made Doom mods. Until then, get off my lawn.